The Chinese diplomat Zhou Daguan reported that the Khmer could produce 3 or even 4 rice harvests a year, enough to feed 1 million people. He also described the wet season, saying that the high water mark around Lake Tonle Sap could reach 70 or 80 feet, completely submerging even tall trees. Modern scholars owe a great deal to Zhou, who wrote about Khmer life in great detail. His memoirs describe day-to-day city life, the economy, social customs, and even the king's relationship with his people. For example, Zhou wrote about the appearance of the king's procession in the year 1296. When the king went on an outing, he was accompanied by 300 to 500 ladies-in-waiting carrying candles in the daylight. He was escorted by a procession of horses, flags, and a band, as well as a retinue of female warriors. The king, his queen, and his concubines rode palanquins, coaches, horses, and elephants. And they were sheltered from the sun by 100 parasols decorated with gold. The tusks of the king's elephant were ornamented with gold, and the king carried a sacred sword in his hand. His hands were painted red, and he was surrounded by a battalion of elephants. There was a group of women who swept the road behind the king to erase any trace of the royal procession. If the king's procession was impressive, then his military resources were even more formidable. The army included a division of 20,000 elephants, plus infantry, cavalry, and a division of archers who could shower the enemy with arrows. Each platoon consisted of 30 infantrymen armed with swords, hand weapons, and shields. Every platoon also had 5 horses and 1 well-trained elephant. Women were also part of the military. The elite Royal Guard was entirely female, and women warriors fought beside men in times of war. At the start of the 13th century, Angkor Thom and its surrounding area was the greatest city of its time. Jayavarman VII had successfully revitalized the Khmer Empire, in part through his impressive building projects. Besides his temples, he expanded the system of highways connecting his capital city to many other provinces. He also built 121 inns as well as 102 hospitals. Before Jayavarman VII came to power, the region was embroiled in turmoil and strife. Neighboring kingdoms saw Khmer disorder as an opportunity to expand. Once he came to power, Jayavarman strengthened his empire and expanded its reach through a series of military campaigns. Inscriptions describe his conquest of a neighboring territory. His army included a cavalry of Chinese horses, a division of elephants, female soldiers, and a full infantry. The newly improved highways offered more efficient routes for military travel. Long processions of soldiers and commanders covered great distances by road. The scene is depicted in a gallery relief in the Bayon. These long marches were comprised of more than just soldiers. Because each campaign lasted years and involved tens of thousands of troops, many soldiers brought along their families. It wasn't only a military mobilization, but a mass migration. Jayavarman VII's military conquests changed the history of both the Khmer Empire and all of Southeast Asia. There are few records from late in the king's reign, but histories record that he was a fierce opponent on the battlefield. One account states, Jayavarman VII swore an oath to take revenge against his enemies. He bore their impudence for 18 years and finally saw his plans to fruition. The Khmer often overwhelmed their enemies with a swift cavalry and a large infantry. Charging elephants no doubt struck fear in the hearts of the enemy. Much of the fighting was close hand-to-hand combat, using a sickle-like weapon called a pakak. Khmer troops were renowned as well-trained, determined warriors. Eventually, the Khmer Empire stretched from what is now Laos and much of Thailand in the north, to the Malay Peninsula in the south, Burma in the west, to central Vietnam in the east, almost all of mainland Southeast Asia. Jayavarman VII's rule strengthened and expanded the Khmer Empire. And to this day, Cambodians revere him as one of their greatest rulers. In the centuries since his reign, nature has obscured his capital city, the proud center of a powerful Khmer Empire. But the legacy of what he created endures. The stately terrace of the elephants, the haunting faces of Bayon Temple, and the many symbols of a deep Buddhist faith all continue to inspire visitors from around the world. Today, hundreds of monks still make pilgrimages to Angkor Thom to learn, teach, and worship as their ancestors did. Though modern conservationists cannot reverse hundreds of years of nature's advances, they can help us imagine how these palaces and temples once appeared and how they supported a vibrant and thriving Khmer civilization. Jayavarman VII was one of the greatest conquerors in Khmer history. He came to power when he was nearly 50 and ruled for at least 3 decades. And during his reign, he dramatically strengthened and expanded his empire. But he's also known in modern Cambodia for another reason. As the first important Buddhist king, he changed the relationship between ruler and ruled. Now, like previous Hindu rulers, Jayavarman VII was still considered a god king. But he also reportedly cared deeply about his people and strived to relieve their suffering. It was definitely a change in style from earlier Khmer rule, and 800 years later, his influence on history can still be felt. Today, Buddhists, Hindus, Cambodians, and hundreds of thousands of people worldwide flock from the farthest corners of the globe to experience the splendor of Angkor. And though the kings who built these astonishing structures have long since passed, it is their triumphs that have left a great legacy, teaching us about the people of this sprawling empire and how their early accomplishments helped shape the world.